for braving the frigid temperatures and coming to the lecture. I think it's going to be a really good one. There's definitely a lot of familiar faces here. Is there anyone who hasn't been here before? Oh, a few. Okay, great. So this is the Great Bay Discovery Center. We're sort of the office/educational hub of the Great Bay National Estuary and Research Reserve. So we're part of Fish and Game, and we're also part of NOAA. And we also have an amazing friends group, the Great Bay Stewards, that helps us with a lot of things. And we do everything from research to land protection, education, training. We do a lot of different things here. So if you've never been to our website, we have a lot of great information there. It's really easy to remember. It's just greatbay.org. So it's a pretty hard one to forget. And also events like this are also on our website. So today is one of our Bayview lectures. So we typically have them in the winter and occasionally in the summer. I don't know if anyone came to the January one. It was also about birds. And so today you're going to hear from Grace McCulloch. She is our Margaret A. Davidson Research Fellow, and she'll explain to you a little bit about what that means. So she's a graduate research fellow, and she's going to be at the reserve for about 2 years total. She is studying Saltmarsh sparrows. She got her undergrad degree at UNH, and she's working towards her graduate degree at UNH right now as well. And she also loves photography, so there's some great pictures in her presentation. So we're going to record the presentation, and she's going to use a microphone. If you have any trouble hearing or anything, just let us know. Great. Grace.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. You're already clapping. I'm excited to say it. As as Melissa mentioned, my name is Grace McCulloch. I am a master's student at UNH in Dr. Adrian Kovach's lab. And I'm also a graduate research fellow at Gibner, Great Bay National Estuary Research Reserve. And today I'm excited to talk to you about racing the tide, understanding saltmarsh sparrow populations in the future. This is me in my natural habitat where I'm most happy. This summer I spent time all over New Hampshire salt marshes, documenting tidal marsh birds and learning more about their habitat use in New Hampshire. And the reason I get to do this awesome work and the things that I love is because I was awarded a Davidson Fellowship from NOAA. And that Davidson Fellowship is for 2 years. This is that I get to do research in alignment with a management priority that Great Bay National Estuary Research Reserve sees for their community. And the management priority that they saw was saltmarsh resilience research. So my research is really grounded in providing information to local communities and to planners. And I also just wanted to call out Rachel Stevens. She's my reserve mentor here, and she's done a lot of work in saltmarsh resiliency as a stewardship coordinator in wildlife last year. And also just noting my research is part of SHARP as well, which is the Saltmarsh Habitat and Avian Research Program. They have provided the wealth of knowledge that we know about tidal marsh birds in New Hampshire and across the region, and really have supported the science behind tidal marsh bird conservation. And they're made up of a lot of different partners. Lots of people are studying marsh birds and their habitats. So it's always nice to know that you have a big community of people who are also helping you with your research. But now to the fun part. This is the salt marsh. Raise your hand if you've ever seen the salt marsh. Yeah, everyone's seen the salt marsh. Raise your hand if you've ever been in the salt marsh. Okay, almost everyone. That's awesome. Well, you were maybe the one person who didn't know what a salt marsh was. Just a brief definition. It's the grassland that we see between the upland and the saltwater features, and it's not like a typical grassland. This grassland is flooded by the tides, has high saline conditions, and is made up of peat, or this decomposing vegetation in really thick layers. And that's characteristic of a salt marsh. How we look at species has changed a lot over history. When the colonists first arrived to North America, we saw this really big, flat, expansive area, and they thought, wow, we have to cut trees. We can farm right here on the marsh. And so that's what they did. They used our salt marshes for agriculture, feeding their livestock, and for this really nutritious source of hay. Salt marsh hay was said to be the best food for their livestock. And this is what our marshes look like in Hampton. These are some postcards from the Hampton Historical Society. Our marshes were extensively used for agriculture in the pain. And this is another painting by Charles Henry Turner in Hampton in 1889. We also saw these big, expansive flat areas and thought, wow, what a great place to build a city. It's clear, it's perfect. We can just fill it and build our city right on top of it. In Boston, Tokyo, San Francisco, Venice, parts of New York City, right next to the coast, all built on parts of Saltmarsh. And while this gave us a lot of good benefits, it did lead to a lot of saltmarsh loss. Unfortunately, you can't really see the shaded zones, but know that most of what was around Boston was saltmarsh in 1777. By 1999, most of that saltmarsh is lost and it's all urban sprawl. So we developed all of that area. And then we started living next to our saltmarshes and we had another problem. We realized that there are lots of mosquitoes, and mosquitoes transmit disease. They're also just really pesky. So we also looked to changing our salt marshes to solve this problem. And that was done by digging ditches. In 1904, they started ditching the salt marsh. The idea was that it would drain water off of the marsh and lead to a decrease in the number of mosquitoes coming out of the marsh. It's still amazing to me to think that people dug these ditches in the marsh. And during the Great Depression, this was actually part of that public works program that was enacted with the Civilian Conservation Corps digging thousands of ditches. If you look at marshes all across New England, about 90% of them are ditched, and someone hand dug all of those ditches. And this is just some ditches in Hampton. You can see some really nice lines, and those are natural water channels in the marsh. But then you see those like hole patterns. Those are natural, dug all of those in the marsh. Very much Chile, it didn't do anything or very little to control mosquitoes. But what it did do was really degrade our salt marshes. Stitching often led to water clogging on the marsh, and then the marshes began to degrade. And eventually, if a marsh degrades enough, then convert back to open water. All of the practices that were used to change the marsh in some way. In some ways, they really benefited humans. We have cities, we used it for agriculture, it supported a lot of things that were happening in our communities, but they did lead to degradation and loss of our salt marshes. And since about the time of the Clean Water Act, we've begun to think more about the benefits that we get from a marsh that remains intact or is in more of a natural state. Some of those benefits include protection of our shorelines from erosion. Marshes act as a trap for sediment, preventing shoreline erosion. They also reduce coastal flooding, or a bit like a sponge, taking in all the water in a big rainstorm event and stopping it from going into our coastal communities. They also enhance water quality. They filter out a lot of pollutants and improve our drinking water. And they promote carbon storage. Only recently are we looking at blue carbon, which is the carbon stored in the salt marsh. And actually, an acre of salt marsh can hold 3 to 5 times more carbon than an acre of tropical forest, which is crazy to me. And then healthy fisheries. There's a lot of fish that nurse in these waters and then go out into the Gulf of Maine and support our fisheries, which are really important to our local economies. And then you're thinking about the fun stuff. It's about wildlife habitat. Salt marshes can wildlife habitat are a plethora of different wildlife, including many of these. When they support many different taxa, from fish to crustaceans to insects, to birds to mammals. But this seminar series is all about birds, so we're going to skip to birds. There are tons of different birds that use our salt marshes, and some of them are generalists, like great blue herons, or everyone's favorite osprey. Or also some specialists like the sparrow, the bird in the bottom right hand corner, from the focus of my research at UNH. So this is a Saltmarsh sparrow. Sometimes I think that when I tell people I'm studying sparrows, their eyes kind of glaze over and they look at me like, "You're studying a sparrow?" And I think they're like picturing this drab brown bird. This bird is not that. It's beautiful. It's got this lovely orange yellow facial coloration. It's got these really defined streaking on its breast and its flanks. And it's also got this cute little thing along the side, which is really thin and well defined. Remember these things when I quiz you later. So they're beautiful birds. I'm going to brainwash you all today. But there's also some cool things about them besides their beauty. Saltmarsh sparrows only occur from Maine to Virginia during the breeding season. They fly a little bit further south through the winter. And in New Hampshire, they arrive about mid to late May and breed through August. And then they stick around for the tail end of fall. As long as there are insects on the marsh, they're primary food source. Now, when you're in the marsh, you don't get a beautiful picture like this. You see something more like this if you're lucky. You see these little birds in the grasses, several hundred meters away. They're shown here in a few seconds, and then they jump off down into the grasses. So that's the way to ID them. Often you hear them before you see them. And they have this cool song, which I'm going to play for you. And I really hope that you hear. It's a little unusual. They sound a little bit like aliens to me. But I've also heard it kind of described as a whisper or dropping a little droplet of water onto a sizzling hot pan and like sizzling noise. It's not what you typically think of a song for a bird, but it's really distinct and it's the best way to ID a Saltmarsh sparrow out in the field. And you also know that it's a male when you hear that because only the males sing in the species. And I like to call them the secretive sparrow because they also just don't act like normal birds. They don't soar in the sky. They don't perch in trees. If you see a bird perching in a tree, that would be a Saltmarsh sparrow. They actually act more like little mammals or mice running in the marsh. You typically see them running through the grasses of the marsh. And when they are flying, it's when you walk through the marsh and you flush them, and they fly for like 3 feet, and then they dive back down into the grass and run like a little marsh mammal. As their name likely suggests, they only live in salt marshes. Saltmarsh sparrow makes sense. But they don't live in every part of the salt marsh. And while marshes can look like a uniform field from the roadside, when you get down in them, you see that actually they have really distinct zones. And so Saltmarsh sparrows nest in the high marsh zone. And this is a zone of the marsh that's only flooded about once a month. So it's flooded with the highest high tides, which are at the full or new moons. And it does not typically nest in the low marsh. And that's the part of the marsh that floods with the daily high tides every single day. So they're nesting in that part of the marsh. It only floods about once or twice a month. And this is what those nests look like. They're about this big, tiny, and the Saltmarsh sparrow female weaves them into the marsh platform, into those grasses, raised off the top of the marsh. And then she typically has a little canopy over the top, whether that's just the way that the grasses fall or it's weaved a little bit. And that canopy basically stops the sparrow chicks from becoming a stack. So it stops avian predators from feeding on them. And the other thing to know is that they typically lay about 4 eggs per nest, and a Saltmarsh sparrow female can have anywhere from 2 to 3 nests. And the other thing is female doesn't work. The male Saltmarsh sparrow does not form a pair bond, and he doesn't help make the nest or raise the young until to the feeding Saltmarsh sparrow. Thanks so much. But they do. They do ski. That's very. So great. And this is what they look like at about 3 days old. And then just 4 days later, they look a little bit more like this. I think they look like little dinosaurs. These pictures were taken by another graduate student in my lab, and they're taken right on Chapman's Landing on Great Bay. And then this is what they look like at 10 days old. And at 10 days old, they're all grown up and they're ready to go out into the marsh on their own. And then by 10 days out, they fledged and leave the nest. And within that period, they're able to fly and forage for feet on their own. Oh, they're so cute. Okay. So living in the marsh is living in an ever-changing home. The marsh can go from looking like this at near low tide to 6 hours later looking like. And while saltmarsh sparrows do nest in the highest part of the marsh, the high marsh, they're still really vulnerable to flooding. And the picture on the right is the sad reality of what happens to a lot of saltmarsh sparrow nests. Flooding is the primary cause of nest failure for the species, and it can happen for both eggs and chicks, unfortunately. That said, saltmarsh sparrows are adapted to live in the sea. We only live in salt marshes, and the saltmarsh sparrow female is actually adapted for rapid renesting during these flood tide events. And that means that the saltmarsh sparrow female can lay a fledge of eggs, can incubate them, can feed its young, can fledge them all within about 23 to 26 day window. And it needs this 23 to 26 flood-free day window to successfully raise its young, which just fits within the 28-day tidal cycle. So it just fits between those peak highest high tides with the full moons every about 28 days. Needless to say, saltmarsh sparrows really live a life leading fucking life on the edge. That said, unfortunately, that edge is tipping. The window of flood-free days for nesting is beginning to close, and high marsh habitat is also being lost. We talked about some of the other threats to marsh, like marsh loss through development or agriculture, and while those were big threats, a lot of them are being addressed now, and the threat of accelerated sea level rise is the new big threat, and the threat that it poses is unprecedented. It poses an enormous threat to our salt marshes as high marsh habitat begins to convert to low marsh and eventually could convert to open water. And it also poses a problem to these sparrows, which rely on this habitat. So the saltmarsh sparrow is predicted to lose 85% of its global habitat by 2050. That's that high marsh that it relies on. And actually, we already know through research from Sharp, saltmarsh sparrows are actually declining globally by 9% a year. And actually, in New England, they're declining even faster at about 12.5% a year. With extinction predicted by 2060. And some estimates put it as early as 2035 as the window for nesting with flood-free days closes. So, question I often get is, yeah, but it's one bird species. You know, small level, it's a bird species I like. I mean, 2 years of my life studying, so I really care about it. But on a more community ecology level, it's not just about one species. There's a whole group of avian tidal marsh specialists with special bird species that live in the salt marsh, and as a community are also experiencing declines. And so by looking into this saltmarsh sparrow, we're actually looking into declines for that whole community. And the other reason that we're talking about saltmarsh is because they're really seen as the canary in the coastline. Just like canaries warn miners about the health of their environment, the saltmarsh sparrow has a lot to tell us about our marshes. And that's because it relies on the high marsh which with accelerated rates of sea level rise is the first marsh zone to really experience those declines from the accelerated rates of sea level rise. And so as time marsh, that marsh flooded monthly, begins to be flooded more often, it eventually could convert to low marsh. That's a lot of doom and gloom, but there was some good news. Many restoration techniques are being piloted for saltmarsh sparrows. Some of those include increasing height. So that's basically making sediment mounds of marsh that could eventually revegetate and then provide opportunities for sparrows to nest on those mounds and be higher up on the marsh platform, hopefully flooding less. And there's some researchers at the University of Connecticut monitoring whether it improves nesting success for saltmarsh sparrows. The second is runoff. We're taking shovels back into the marsh, but this time we're being really careful and not digging super big, deep ditches. Instead, we're digging these really narrow channels to drain stagnant pooled water on the marsh that could lead to marsh decline. And then we're also exploring ditch remediation. This is a photo from Carpet River National Wildlife Refuge, where they're exploring this technique specifically to improve habitat for saltmarsh sparrows, with the idea being that you build that ditch back up from the ground, allowing it to revegetate, and trying to reverse that subsidence trajectory in the marshes. And here's just a note that it remains to be seen how effective they will be. Hopefully soon we'll have good results on what the best technique was for certain cases, but still remains to be seen. And one thing to note is also that the restoration is really being piloted at this fine scale, so as to not negatively impact saltmarsh sparrows or where saltmarsh sparrows are nesting. We want to explore these techniques at a really fine scale, see if they work, and then scale them up. So we're making sure we're not doing harm when we're exploring these techniques. So where do I fit into the conservation picture for saltmarsh? Well, during my time at UNH and at Gibner, my research were really focused, well, I focused here, I know a couple people have done masters. There's a lot of hypotheses and predictions and a whole list of objectives, but it really boils down to two questions. And the first question for my research is, where are the saltmarsh sparrows currently in New Hampshire? It's a nice, simple question. And then the second one is, well, what features best predict that habitat for saltmarsh sparrows in New Hampshire? And how can we improve current habitat prioritization tools for conservation and planning for these sparrows in New Hampshire, and then possibly region-wide as well. And so my research this summer, collecting data in the field, really focused on the first question: where are saltmarsh sparrows currently in New Hampshire? To find that out, I did point counts at 88 locations across New Hampshire salt marshes, and did 2 of these per location, and it was a 10-minute survey. So what's a point count? Well, point count is me going out into the marsh in predetermined location with my binoculars and my ears and counting all of the birds that I see within a 50-meter radius circle. And then a 50 to 100 meter radius from that. And all 10 minutes. So that sounds really simple, right? It's good. And this is what I saw every morning. It's beautiful, right? No one gets to see the sunrise on the Saltmarsh. And then everything's looks wonderful. And then you realize, like I said, I have to be up there to see them. So I need to get up at 3:30 in the morning to see that. So, but even it's worth the same price. But the morning was the best time to survey for saltmarsh sparrows, so I got up at 3:30 in the morning. And those points look really close together on the map too, right? Then when you get into the marsh, you're like, oh no, I have to walk several miles to get to this compound in the middle of the marsh. So I got my steps in the summer. And then you realize, oh no, someone did show my office. So I have to also navigate this marsh to get to a point. And so that's what this looks like. And there's my field assistant Brooke jumping a ditch. We developed a new technique, very scientific. We got a pole, it was just long enough that we knew we could jump that distance. And we carried the pole with us in the marsh, and we could touch the other end of the ditch, we knew we could jump it. If we couldn't, we could touch the ground and find a new way. Marshes also have unexpected holes. They seem to be endless, and while you can see this hole, often you can't see the hole until you're in it. And of course, we have our friends the bugs. There are a lot of different bugs in the marsh, and while they're really important for our wildlife to eat, researchers don't want to even find them. And so, like you also say, so we can say here. But it's all that you get rewarded with some beautiful things that other people don't get to see in the marsh, like this little pond. And sometimes if you're really lucky, the person at Country Club lets you borrow their gold card to drive to your point count locations. Sounds fun. And then you also get amazing opportunities like this. I have some of the points that I could only access by kayak. Who gets the kayak to work? So you make it, you overcome all those obstacles, and then you go riding first. And some of them are really easy, like this one. What's this one? Yeah, Rick Blue Heron. Some of them are familiar faces. They get really upset when you're there now, so we always give them a big wide berth. But it's beautiful watching them come and feed your chicks while you're doing the farm. And sometimes you get ones like snowy egret, yeah. And then we get things like this. So one of these birds is a Saltmarsh sparrow. Which one? Yes. The one on the right. So the one on the right is the Saltmarsh sparrow. I'm so proud of you. I'm gonna pretend that I taught you that and didn't know it before you came. Okay, so that's Saltmarsh sparrow. One is Nelson sparrow. And these sparrows both live in New Hampshire, and they were both once considered the same species, but sharp sparrow. But the Nelson sparrow has slightly different habitat requirements than the Saltmarsh sparrow. It also is genetically distinct, and it has a different range than the Saltmarsh sparrow. The Nelson sparrow occurs about New Hampshire, north, up into Maine and Canada, and then along the Great Lakes, whereas the Saltmarsh sparrow is really southern Maine south. So in New Hampshire, we're right in that zone with both of these sparrows, and to make matters more complicated, these sparrows interbreed. So you end up with a lot of hybrids out in the marsh. And in fact, if you see a Saltmarsh sparrow out in the Saltmarsh, there's a good chance it actually has a little bit of Nelson sparrow in it too. So in New Hampshire, when we report numbers of sparrows, we typically report them as Nelson sparrow, Saltmarsh sparrow, and hybrids all combined into the category called sharp-tailed sparrows. And so we did all that big great effort to get this data. What does it look like? This is what it looks like in Hampton and Stephen. As you orient yourself to the map, these are points where we did a point count twice over the breeding season. And then for each color, there's a number of sharp-tailed sparrows that we detected in total. Let's say, red is 0 to 1. Orange is 1 to 2, yellow 3 to 4 sharp-tailed sparrows, green 5 to 6 sharp-tailed sparrows, blue 7 to 8. And there are 2 takeaways we take from this map, Hampton and Stephen. There are a lot of red chunks. Sharp-tailed sparrow numbers are really low. This isn't just a picture that we saw in Hampton. This is the story that we saw in Rye, and also in new locations like Northampton, Great Bay. And then the other thing that I take from this map is we actually have very few in Seabrook. And we only detected 2 sharp-tailed sparrows in Seabrook over the whole course of the summer. From this research with this field collection, we also identified some pockets for Saltmarsh sparrows in the state. And one of those is off Cape Breton in the northwest circle. And then the other one was along Route 1A in the northeast. So we had data on where sparrows are. But that doesn't really tell us whether they're nesting or breeding or how many males or females there are. So Sharp has another survey technique. It's called a repeat demographic survey. And it basically gives us a better picture of what's happening on those marshes, for those marshes where we have a high number of sparrows. That survey method includes the point count, like I mentioned. It includes also a transect walk, so walking along the line, flushing birds and counting them as they flush. It also includes some push surveys. And then the exciting part is it includes misnetting for saltmarsh sparrows in the marsh. As I mentioned, doing a point count, you can't really get the number of males and females because when you see a saltmarsh sparrow, you can't distinguish males and females. So by catching them with mist nets and banding them, when you have a sparrow in the hand, you can tell whether it's male or female. So this allows us to get a ratio of males to females. It also allows us to catch juveniles and see if juveniles will be fledglings are being hatched. And by banding them, we can band them 1 year and then see if they're returning to the same marsh the following year. And as I'll show you in a little bit, we did have some sparrows that were banded in 2021 and returned to our marshes in 2022 to the exact same marsh. Which shows us that sparrows are coming back to our marshes in New Hampshire. And then we also look at breeding behavior. Are we hearing saltmarsh sparrows sing? Are we seeing signs of mating? Are we seeing saltmarsh sparrow females bringing food back to their nests? And then also nests. We do opportunistic nesting out of the marsh. And when we find a nest, we record things like the number of eggs, the number of chicks, and what age those chicks are. So during this season, we had 9 rapid demographic studies. We actually wanted to have more in the state, but we didn't have enough sparrows for it another site, unfortunately. But for each of those 9 sites, we had 2 visits each. And those sites include places in Rye, places in Northampton, Hampton Seabrook, and along Great Bay. I would just note that Chapman's Landing, that's part of Great Bay National Estuary Research Reserve, and New Hampshire Fishing Game Property. That's within the sparrows. So what does that data look like? Well, this is one of our sites in Hampton. And this is, as you already saw, it's along Route 1A, and then there's Great Boar's Head, which right behind there on that marsh. This is what it looks like from above. It's a really wet marsh. It's kind of like walking on jello. There are a lot of those holes that I mentioned. Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge to get to, but we did have saltmarsh sparrows there. And so at this site, we captured 16 sharp-tailed sparrow individuals. 15 of those were male. Only one of them was a female. But of those 16, 6 of them were recaptures. So they were banded in 2021, and we returned to that marsh in 2022. Showing that saltmarsh sparrows are returning to the site. And this is a picture we saw at most of our field sites for our rapid demographic surveys. Sharp-tailed sparrows were returning to the same site, and we had lower numbers of females than we had males caught. And we also found 1 nest at this location. How many of you have been to a banding station before? Great. How many of you have banded? Yes. Okay, we have 1. We have 1 bander. Did it look more like this? Okay, let's do that.
I was there.
So this is the banding station that you're likely very familiar with, that I volunteer at. And this is what most banding operations look like. You have some kind of structure, you have tables, you have lots of books that you can look at, and you have like a seat that you can sit at. But on the marsh, we don't have any of that. So this is what our operation looks like. It's very high tech. I have a beach umbrella. I have a yoga mat as my workbench, and my regular kit, like you have a banding station, but it's a makeshift field office, but it gets the job done. We also, unlike a typical operation where you have the nets set up in advance, we have to take all of our equipment out into the marsh and set those nets ourselves in the marsh, which is sometimes difficult to get a pole into the marsh. That was one of the most challenging parts of the field too, was just getting that pole into the ground. And if you're not familiar with bird banding, push bird is the bird flies into this net, can't really see, and it flies in, it gets caught in the net, and then we go out and we extract it very carefully, following these standard procedures to ensure no harm to the bird. And that's something I do really want to underscore. Whenever we're working with these birds, they're always the top priority. Their health is the top priority, and my research really comes second. So if they're ever in trouble or they ever seem overstressed, we just release them and let them go work. This is one of the Saltmarsh sparrows that we banded over the summer. We put a little aluminum band on their ankle. If you're not familiar with bird banding, it kind of looks like this band on their ankle, and then you can tell it has a special number on it that will identify it for anyone else to catch it, and they can look it up in the federal database. While we had them in hand, we also did some measurements on them. This is contributes to the federal database, but also these measurements are being used by other researchers and to look at morphological differences between saltmarsh sparrows and Wilson sparrows, and being used by one of my colleagues who's doing the research recently on the movement. And this one is really cute. It's a juvenile, and you actually can't tell the difference between juvenile saltmarsh and Nelson sparrows. They both just look golden, and we like to call them the golden nuggets of the marsh. So just so cute. And then we weigh them really quickly, and then within a matter of seconds, they're gone. We do this in a matter of minutes, and Ben Flemmer, who I worked with this summer, he can do it in under a minute. And then they're back out in their habitat where they're supposed to be. Okay. This is a little summary of two of the sites. The one over here, still looking, but the one on the far right is the site that I was talking about in Hampton. Two nests were found there in 2021, we found one in 2022. And then there's another site that we went to up in the similar story, very low number of nests. I like to show this slide because I think it really puts into perspective how few saltmarsh sparrows are out on the landscape, or why their conservation need is really important. There was a master's student at UNH before me in 2008, and she went to similar locations out on the marsh in New Hampshire. And when she went to these two locations, she saw a very different story on our marshes. When she went to these two locations in 2008, she found 27 nests. And while the nest searching effort might have been different, it still shows and tells a shocking story. You can hear a 9% decline per bird, and like it's big, but I'm not very good with those kind of numbers. It doesn't really mean much to me. But when I think about like a local location in our state and see these numbers, it really takes it home for me. My future research at UNH, like I mentioned, was going to take it another step further. I'm moving beyond just where are saltmarsh sparrows and where are the nests. And I'm moving to how can we predict habitat in New Hampshire for these birds. I'm also exploring the efficacy of the habitat prioritization tools for saltmarsh sparrows in New Hampshire. We have several mapping tools, and they include metrics that we know are important to birds for high marsh habitat, but they have ground truths with the actual data where the birds are on the landscape. So we're going to compare the marshes where the birds actually are to the marshes that the tools are predicting are important. And the reason I'm doing this is because these planning tools will be informing where restoration for these birds is going to occur and where land conservation for saltmarsh sparrows will occur. In all of this, identifying the features most important to saltmarsh sparrows in New Hampshire, with the ultimate aim of improving decision making and conserving the species. And I just want to thank you all for coming today. Oh, a lot of thanks to a lot of different people, who helped me this summer on the marsh. And one person in particular I really want to highlight is Brooke Healy. She's the top left top left corner. She was an undergrad at UNH, working out with me in the marsh every day this summer, and we both really learned together and with me done fields, even though I was really grateful. Grateful for everyone else on the slide and the many partners who helped with this project. I'm grateful for you guys for coming. It's cool. Thank you. Oh, and I have an email if you want to reach out. And I also, if you're into Instagram, I have an Instagram account. I love photographing wildlife. And I also have some marsh adventures on there. So, and I have time for questions.
Just a question about the male-female ratio, it's one female. Do you think that might have been part that was nesting season, you know, is it typical for more males to be captured?
So the funny thing about Saltmarsh sparrows is it is, you can have a lot of birds in a site, but it doesn't actually mean reproduction is happening. And you'll often get little pockets of what I like to call bachelor sparrows. So the males all hanging out together without any females. And that's why I really want to have that reproductive piece, because you can see where the sparrows are on the marsh, but you may not be any breeding happening, so we want to know about something. But yeah, sometimes it is easier to catch a male. Especially if the female's on the nest most of the day, and the males are flying back and forth, so they don't have any privacy. Yeah.
Several of the areas that you were looking at in your research are being overrun by the invasive Phragmites. Are they having any impact on what you're doing?
Yeah, so we just asked if frag is going to impact Saltmarsh sparrows. Phragmites is an invasive species, if you don't know, that's invading our high marshes. And the story with frag is a little complex. Marsh sparrows, there's been major efforts to get rid of frag. It's an invasive species that overwhelms the salt marsh. And one of those efforts has been actually increasing the water on the marsh, so flooding that marsh to get rid of frag. Because you can unfortunately imagine if you're flooding the marsh, you actually could short-term impact that high marsh and impact nesting success. And there's some research that shows that it does. So it's a bit complicated because you want to balance the frag. You don't want the frag to overwhelm the whole marsh where you lose all the sparrow habitat. But you also don't want to do a huge project to get rid of the frag and flood out the Saltmarsh frag and sparrow. So yeah, that is a bit of a complicated issue. Good question.
Yeah, I have two questions actually. One is, I don't know if you're a bird whisperer or something, a friend of mine, they often come over to you and land on you as a friendly gesture versus extricating them from a web.
So Saltmarsh sparrows definitely don't. I do know that some chickadees, like an Ipswich River sanctuary, are very well accustomed to humans, and if you have seeds, they will come and land. But these ones don't. When we do take them out of the net, they are surprisingly sweet. We always hold them in a special grip to make sure that there is less stress as possible. And when we're taking them from the net to my makeshift lab, we have them in a bag that actually helps calm them down. But yeah, they don't typically land on your hands. It'd be nice if they did.
And there was one other thing too. I was talking to one, her daughter makes jewelry, and she was involved. I didn't realize it was such a strong biological biology type of person. And she specialized in reproductive animal behavior. And she said that depending on who the president was, like with Bush, it totally dried up all the grants. And do you work in conjunction with specialists and just specialize in reproductive animals?
Yeah, I have about 8 other graduate students in my lab at UNH under Dr. McCulloch, and one of them is studying just Saltmarsh sparrow mating and looking at the mating system. That's a promiscuous mating system, which, as I mentioned, like the eggs in a nest and all become different fathers, and so she's looking at the ratio of just that. And looking at how maybe certain males are selected or more successful and have more offspring. So yeah, and there's another student in the lab who's also just looking at the evolutionary history of Saltmarsh sparrows and Nelson sparrows. So there's a lot of research being done about these birds.
Is that still dependent on grants to do that type of thing?
We still, I rely on grants for my research. Most research does still rely on grants. I mean, I feel really, but I can grant from them. Yeah.
So with sea level rising pretty much everywhere, is there any evidence of transition of climate saltwater line from the upland territory?
Oh, yeah, so, are there any evidence of high marsh transitioning up into the uplands? And we like to call that marsh migration, so the marsh can move. Yeah, like marsh migration is not my area of expertise. I will say there are a lot of people in this room who are looking at marsh migration as a potential for salt marshes. One of the problems is that we often have development right next to a marsh. And if there's a hardened edge, the marsh can't migrate into the development. And then the other thing you want to think about is the marsh next to a really steep slope. But if it was next to a really steep slope, it wouldn't be able to migrate. But there are some efforts looking at how can we help the marsh to migrate, and they're actually looking at maybe like we can cut trees down a little bit to help encourage that process. But yeah.
Human migration.
Some birds. Rachel's raising her hand. She probably doesn't understand that.
It's that, sometimes you can see where the marsh is not blocked, and can that, when grading land, you can see it around very big, placing standard dead trees. So, and if you actually go to the end of our boardwalk here, when you enter you can see them out of the land and view, and there's a whole suite of dead trees there, and so that's the site where you can, yeah. See your slowly to change. Yeah, go. Yeah, you're sitting inside when you can happen to see you up on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this species native to that area that you have,
Yeah.
or is it regional?
Oh, yeah. So, saltmarsh sparrows only occur on the Atlantic coast of the US. They don't occur anywhere else in the world.
Then I have one more question. Involved, time scale, after the last ice age, like 2000 years ago, there was rapid sea level rise, like having more than. So my question is, have you been able to determine keep things very strict and American,
Yeah.
speculate on it, and the time scale or.
Yeah, the question is, how long have saltmarsh sparrows been around relative to the ice age? And the answer is that I should know the answer, and my lab mate who's studying evolution would be so ashamed of me. But it's since the ice age, and what I will say is that the saltmarsh sparrow is older, evolution-wise than the Nelson sparrow. The Nelson sparrow is about 5,000 years. Old as a species, and the saltmarsh sparrow is a little bit older than that, but I can't remember which number for me. Like, we'll give it to you at the end though. It's a great question. Anyone else?
Well, how long did they live?
Perfect, I didn't say that, did I? Well, the average lifespan is very short, it's about a couple of years. Most birds have a pretty short lifespan. It's hard because the estimate that we have on their lifespan is based on mark recapture, and that's based on a assumption that they'll come back to the same marsh year after year. So we're a little unsure about the lifespan estimate, but it's pretty short. Yeah.
That can be part of a national database, and, so that as climate continues to change, and birds are everything go different places than they used to. I mean, there was a national.
Yes,
database.
yeah. National database, the federal banding lab that has where you enter all your records, so all the band numbers and what the bird was, how much it weighed. So all of that data is stored, and there are some big studies that look at that data set to see trends and shifts over time. Yeah. One question.
Yeah. Said in your discussion that the saltmarsh sparrow is spending a lot of time running around. Is there a way to capture them from the ground instead of from the air? Maybe males and females operate differently on the air and on the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do males and females operate differently than on the air and the ground? We know that it's harder to catch a saltmarsh for a female. Actually, this is cool. Our Chapman's Landing, they have Talia of birds, graduate student who mentioned, she puts a little receiver on the aluminum on one of the bands on the Saltmarsh Sparrow's leg, and that receiver pings when she has her detector here, so she can tell where the bird is on the marsh, and she can actually put that detector next to the nest. And when the sparrow comes back to the nest, the Saltmarsh sparrow female, she'll get a reading on it and know that that specific female is at it. So there are some ways, but they're a little bit more high tech. Great question though. Well, one more.
Moving in the rising sea that would contribute to the decline of the saltmarsh sparrows, and I think the two things. One is water temperature changes, because the water is increasingly a little bit warmer, a little bit warmer, a little bit warmer. And I have no idea if that makes any difference at all, but it might also produce vegetation changes in the saltmarsh itself. And you know, is there kind of a migration of vegetation or maybe some of those food sources are moving farther north, or I don't know what, but temperature and vegetation changes. Any thoughts on that? So,
I am not about water temperature. As the planet warms, there's often an increase in biomass for vegetation, so I can see that. But problem is that the marsh is we're losing the high marsh, so you can have an increase in low marsh biomass, but it wouldn't benefit the sparrows. But another threat to saltmarsh sparrows is pollution. This isn't really a threat up north because the flooding is getting them, but further down south, there has been some research that suggests that predation is another cause of this failure for the species. Great. Oh, Corey has one.
More like the whole questions related to perfect species that are happening either at the edge, the upland edge, or within the community. So I just wanted to comment that we do a lot of work to understand the marsh vegetation trends too, which is one of the reasons it's so exciting to have Grace being doing the work on the saltmarsh sparrows. We can kind of dig into the relationships between the changes that we're detecting. We are detecting changes in vegetation and, you know, the fish and birds and animals that kind of occurs. Chris Peter, our research coordinator, leading has led an effort in New England, here in New Hampshire, and nationally to look at those changes in the saltmarsh vegetation. And I'm hoping to couple some of the metrics together in the coming year.
Well, thank you all for coming. If you have any other questions, feel free to come on.